in Boulder, because there was this fire that struck just outside Boulder in Colorado, and they had developed on flat land where nobody had thought there would ever be a fire. And sure enough, it was a fire that just wiped the whole thing out. And now people can't go back because rebuilding is going to be so traumatic, but also it's so expensive to rebuild, et cetera, et cetera. Quite a lot of difficulties, I think, in this area, but we're going to have to face it somehow, I think. This is Pat. I'm done for now.
If I could use this opportunity to throw out a quick PSA, because on tech news, oftentimes in the comments, right, we'll see, some people be like, this is tech news. Why are we not talking about tech news, non-related tech things? But life is interconnected. And I'd like to think the whole point of talking about tech is maybe there could be a solution. But if you don't look bigger than, what's profitable in tech, what's the point, right? It's really analyzing what are the greater problems that maybe tech can solve, and with a community of great minds coming together, that maybe we can generate a solution, or we're all just going to be screwed at one point. So this is Pauline. I'm done speaking. Thank you.
Amen to that. Amen to that. We have no
Absolutely,
shortage.
Pauline. Thank you. And I think tech certainly has come in to help in the materials world and how things can be constructed. So, for instance, in building a house of wood now, it doesn't necessarily have to be just frames and insulation and what do they call it, siding in North America, or outside panels. Here we have them in the UK and in Europe. But you can have solid wood, and wood that's been laminated together with very special glues, and they become so sturdy and so resistant to shrinkage or movement that you can build houses of solid wood now, and they are very, very sturdy. You also have glass,
I'll be back
windows that are
I'll be
made
back in a
now.
minute.
Okay.
Keep going.
Carry on, Pat. Are you done, Pat?
Oh, sorry, I hadn't unmuted. I'll continue just for one more minute or so, Cheryl, if that's all right. The fact that technology has helped how newer properties can be built nowadays, and you can incorporate into those some renewable technology, for instance, what's been talked about for decades now, air source heat pumps, other heat pumps, all sorts of other things you can equipment to your home to circulate the air and so on and so forth. And yeah, I think there's a long way to go before we will all adapt to all of that and incorporate the technologies in how we live. But there is that huge potential for it to work together and provide us with a much, much, much better life here on planet Earth.
Okay, for those
Yeah,
who are
so Pat, I want
interested,
to add
right, you
something.
can actually take
Do you mind if I
reference
add
of
something on top of
the
that?
construction and also the building materials in Japan, because Japan has almost all the natural disaster they can think of typhoon, earthquake, blah blah blah. So take a look at them, because they actually do a pretty good job in their building materials and construction. Who wanted to talk just now?
Yeah, it's me and Juan. I wanted to add a little bit there to what Pat was
Go ahead.
saying. Yeah, just wanted to add a little bit to what Pat was saying. Actually, there is a tech link for me. I'm a tech investor, and I mean, focused on the African continent. But more recently, I've been looking at things that are obviously more, because obviously we know, and Messi knows this, that fintech is very, very hot in Africa, almost too hot. There's just too many fintech companies, and you wonder how many payment ways or ways to land or accumulate wealth, etc. All important, but there are other problems as well. And our most recent investment is actually a company that it tries to solve two problems at once with tech related to this, which is taking plastic, which is becoming obviously a huge problem across the world, but also in Africa. There's a growing amount of plastic all across the continent as the middle class starts to kind of rise, and there's more and more consumerism, taking plastic and turning it into building material, so sort of building blocks, bricks. And these building material, plastic is made fireproof, more fireproof, but also it has better insulation properties. There's also the issue of in parts of Africa where it's very, very hot, and so if you use kind of traditional bricks or cement, etc., it can have some issues around depending how you build your house, could have a heat issue. And so that's something that I'm doing more and more of, is thinking of ways to use tech, and also pushing ESG as well, right? So how do you document and report to our investors how influential this is. And I have tech investors in my fund. I have tech entrepreneurs, tech angels who've made a lot of money, and they love this company the most out of all the companies that we've backed more recently. They're just bored and yawning about fintech, and they're like, at least you're solving real problems, which is obviously both the sort of plastic pollution as well as affordable housing, because there's a ticking time bomb in Africa on housing beyond just kind of get a roof over their head, but what materials are they actually using to kind of build low cost housing in urban areas and beyond.
And I've pinned an article on top if anyone is interested in what's going on in Japan. Any other non-tech news that whoever wants to bring up?
Oh, I saw you pin the
Oh yes,
China pandemic thing. Just a little quick
because
update.
you mentioned before that May 1st is a critical time, right?
Yeah, but right now, just like you have this Golden Week in Japan, they have the Golden Week as well. So people uh decrease going out. But in Beijing, the Universal Studios Beijing, the Palace Museum in Beijing, basically every big tourist site closed down yesterday. So that means if you are gonna plan a trip to Beijing, better not in the past in the next this month or next month. I think it's not a good choice because
Yep.
right now, yeah, for foreigners, I saw a very famous YouTuber. It's called Xilan. I think it's from where Europe, Brazil, yeah. But he has this video to describe how he lived in Shanghai the last month, but it's not. He speaks fluent in Chinese, so no English subtitles. Otherwise, it's the best materials for English speakers to understand how people are treated in Shanghai right now. And
Yeah,
you see
yeah. I
that?
mean, I have some update as well because my friend I just managed to catch up with my friend who managed to leave Shanghai mid of last week after a long delay because he's meant to move back to his home country, but he was stuck in Shanghai because of the lockdown. He was actually telling me that it was really extreme mental stress there. Not just no food, the elderly are actually left at home abandoned with no food and no elderly care. And he's saying that there are a lot of people who died not because of COVID, but because they have other, like for example asthma.
Yeah, just like you
They
have
couldn't get ventilator,
you need
and
the
then right, and also
kidney
some people
disease.
like have
Yeah,
curable disease like
yeah,
kidney
yeah,
stones, couldn't
yeah,
get
yeah,
not able to get treated in the hospital, and was so painful they decided to commit suicide, and pregnant women losing their babies, etc., etc. So it was really really a bad
yeah.
bad
The
situation.
normal medical treatments are crowded out. Yeah, so yeah, it says the cases in Shanghai is decreasing, but still you no green light for fully lift of the lockdown. So yeah,
Yep. I mean,
think
he's also adding that 85% of expats living in Shanghai is thinking about moving out already. So it's no longer a place
yeah, the
that's friendly for
rich
expats. Yeah.
people will definitely try to apply for some immigration in those. I don't know. Yeah, I've heard a lot. Yeah, they consider to apply for the not for the citizen, but at least some kind of resident immigrants immigration things. Yeah, yeah,
Yep. And I've also heard something like because there is a very important CCP meeting in October. So
yeah.
Xi
The
Jinping,
20th National Congress for CCP. Yeah.
right, and he will not kind of loosen the grip until he probably win the re-election, because if he kind of um change the
Mm,
strategy from the zero COVID strategy right now, in other words, he's actually admitting that the Western way of living with the like
yeah,
living
yeah,
with endemic, yeah, is the right way to go, and that will actually weaken his position. I have his internal party doubting his decision making skills and may force him to step down. So that's the reason why he would not want that to happen. So maybe this will probably have to go on until October when the meeting is over.
Yeah, but there are two kinds of this national congress thing. The one in October is National Congress of CCP, the Communist Chinese Communist Party, and there's another one next March. It's the National Congress of this Chinese government. So he has two positions to elect. To so the first one in October is that it's easier for Xi Jinping, but the next one next March is more important for him. So right now, if we can see a little bit is on the pandemic control in October. I think as we can say it's lucky because he has another election next week and next year. So that's from all the analysis.
Yep, and
All right.
apparently there
Okay.
is also internal politics within the CCP. So apparently the one that she is leading and the one that is previously, I think, the Jiang Zemin's Shanghai clique. So I think Jack Ma and the other business, like Zhao Wei and the other business people, probably belongs to the Shanghai clique. So
Yeah,
yeah,
Shanghai. Yeah, Jiang Zemin said his power this
yep.
time. Yeah, in
Hey,
Shanghai.
Rachel
Yeah,
is off the phone now.
but
Rachel, you have any comment about this article?
uh, pardon what? Sure, what did you say?
Rachel.
Sorry,
Retro.
I
Yeah,
haven't read it. Yes, but I think it was clear from the very beginning. It's a political
Yes.
infight, and there really is starting to have kind of a widespread. It's not just Shanghai anymore because now Beijing is going into that similar situation. So I think this is probably started in Shanghai because Shanghai obviously is one of the strong opposition camp because of Jiang Zemin. But on the other hand, I think I don't think she's very secure. That's why I'm not very optimistic how this will end. Like Cheryl just said, it could last until in this fall when he gets elected. I think the position within the CCP is the most important because in China, this is CCP leads others, even though he has two upcoming position to elections, but I think that within CCP, that's the most important.
Can I just clarify, Rachel and Bibi and Cheryl, in your readings of the local media in Asia, but especially the Chinese press, do you get the overall feeling that it's not just about the big shots being competitive and arguing with each other or losing confidence in Xi Jinping, but the grassroots? Do you get a feeling that there is a shifting going on there? And 4 months between now and October, 4 months can be a very long time. How are you able to gauge what the grassroots are thinking and how much advantage they might get if they were to push out stronger?
I think that there's two sides. One is Xi has been having this kind of a stronghold since he was elected 10 years ago, right? And he did it in such a slow fashion that I think people started to get used to it. There is a Chinese idiom, and Bibi will know, Cheryl probably, 温水烫青蛙 essentially says if you put a frog in water and you gradually increase the temperature of the water, the frog wouldn't feel it until it's too late. It would just die from it. So I think the way he controls the media is such that people gradually lose freedoms and they think that this is normal. I mean, part of the problem of this whole COVID and this whole thing is the information, kind of a misinformation, disinformation. So most of the people actually initially had no idea what the Omicron's the fatality is. A lot of people in China still think, all the Europe, the West is suffering tremendously from Omicron. I mean, there was even CCTV deliberately translate the wrong WHO infections data, fatality data. I mean, things like this. So they control the information. So a lot of people actually just don't have right information. So the grassroots, for those people who are well informed, who can actually use VPN, who have a brain, they know, but they also kind of resign to the fact that they can't really change the big picture. So I think unrest definitely is a possibility if people have to worry about feeding side. I really think people got brainwashed for so long, and then gradually they don't fight anymore. So
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you, Rachel. You know how in the West, in the media, we've gone on recently about the Great Resignation. I think from a cultural perspective in China, there's a whole different take about the Great Resignation. That resignation or a sort of a sitting back because you feel you have no control, you have no chance of change. You just resign yourself to accepting this and just keep quiet and carry on. Rather unfortunate, I think that seems to be quite high in the Chinese mentality, but we'll see how it goes, eh? Thank you for those comments, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Pat, you just said a greater resignation, but actually the young generation will have this life lot thing. So it's
Yeah,
not
similar,
totally
isn't
the
it?
same. Yeah, it's similar. Not the same as this time in this pandemic control thing, but for the youngsters, they don't see the future of themselves, no matter how hard they put the effort. So the life lot, or you can say not life low. It's like a give up to get better life with extra effort thing. Mm.
Okay. Shall we move on to Ukraine news? If anybody have any updates for us, Messi or Ben, do you have a summary?
I think one of the things that has been happening on the weekend has been the UN and other aid organizations kind of coming up with a solution to evacuation of few people. So I think on Saturday they did maybe about 10 people they were talking about, and they mentioned also the report on CNN was saying that they were given the people who were getting evacuated were given the choice of like getting to the Russia side or Ukraine side. But they said today that they were trying to do about 100 people, so, which is a bigger number that would make sense, but they were still not sure, even though they said that the evacuation has happened and the report was saying the bus has left Mariupol, but they haven't seen yet the arrival, but they were still expecting it to get there. But either way, they were talking about having few people, up to 100 people, getting evacuation from Mariupol. So hopefully that happens. And the other big news in that one is also a big delegation of the U.S., House of Representatives, organized by Nancy Pelosi, did visit Zelensky, the president, in Ukraine, Zelensky and his team, as well as she did visit Poland as well, and recommitted that the U.S. would be behind Ukraine, no matter how long it takes until they get their, I don't know if the until the war gets done or victory or agreement. But anyway, it reaffirmed the commitment of the U.S. government from Congress coming as a representative of the American people. So that was the other big news.
Yep.
Done speaking.
Yep. I just saw a picture on a magazine on Time magazine recently. Apparently, Zelensky still have time to post for Time magazine. What's going on there? Looks quite peaceful. I don't know. And yeah, pin on top, whoever is interested in his story.
Okay, I'm back.
Hey, welcome back, Tyler. Okay,
What
we
are
are
the,
done with the Ukraine news as well, so you can move on.
okay, great. So we need the air horn, I guess.
Unless Ken wants to bring up any.
Too late.
Okay, too late.
Okay, so the top story that I have, tell me if yours is different, Cheryl. It's that from the Financial Times that in a preliminary view, the EU says Apple has abused its dominance in mobile payments by limiting competitors' access to NFC chips in iPhones. Do you remember me saying, Thursday, that Apple is going to lose that one? Do you remember that? Does anyone remember that? Because they are
No.
doing that. That the EU was going to investigate if Apple's abusing, and now the results have come in, and that the EU decided what I said they would decide, which is Apple is abusing this. They did a little investigation. Does anyone remember that headline last week?
Yeah, we read that. Yeah.
It went by
Yeah.
very quickly. Yeah, but I said I'm telling you now, that the EU is going to decide, as they should, by the way, that Apple is abusing this, and there you have it. That's the top headline today from the EU Commission Antitrust. Commission sends statement of objections to Apple over practices regarding Apple Pay. Reuters version of the headline says Apple hit with EU antitrust charge over mobile payments technology and the fact that they're blocking competitors' access to the NFC chips in the phones because they want that sweet bonus of ease of use for themselves, and they're hoarding it. And our dear friend Michael would say, "Hey, it's their phone. It's their NFC chip in their damn phone. They don't. There's no law that says they have to allow that." Well, in a weird way, some might argue that they do because they're playing. It's anti-competitive. Yeah, is what it is. It's like Google. Some would argue also that Google should be able to promote Google Maps as the top link for every geolocation search on the planet. And they should be able to promote all of their own products and services endlessly at the top of all of their, inside of their own products and services. And, this all goes back to when Microsoft got busted because they were promoting Internet Explorer as sort of the default browser in Windows, and ended up at what was it? Matt would likely know. Matt, it got up to 98% market share on Internet Explorer for the internet at one point for internet browsers. And that's eventually what led to the ruling that they had to sort of play fair even inside of their own operating system and let other browsers have a chance. So similarly, Apple has to allow other payment systems to have a chance to operate on their devices as well in a very similar way. So there's pretty clear precedence for this type of stuff. And there it is. Yeah, they were blocking the other people from using the NFC chip. They were trying to hoard that convenience hack for themselves. You can't really do that. Benedict Evans, who used to be at Andreessen Horowitz, tweeted saying, as expected, the EU will order Apple to open up NFC and Apple Pay APIs to competitors. Interestingly, Apple just announced APIs to take payments, just not to make payments. So, and that's a separate headline that you heard me get crazy excited about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. Apple's on the verge of allowing anyone to receive payments as a merchant. Anyone can be a merchant. Anyone can receive payments magically through the NFC. Not just pay at cashiers who happen to have NFC readers, but now everyone has an NFC reader and sender, both, which is your goddamn phone. Oh boy, is this a fun game changer. This totally solves the problem of paying people you don't know anytime, anywhere, for any reason. It's huge. That's huge. That's really freaking big. So, yeah, here we go. And that's probably why it's right on time for this to happen, that they have to enable this for everybody right when Apple was about to take one of their biggest moves ever. It might be a little too late. So,
yeah, the NFC, I use NFC on my iPhone at the moment to unlock various doors and things around the house, like right now.
Yeah.
I've just tweeted some tags that work. Interestingly, it started to disappear on iPhone. It disappeared out of the control center. There used to be a control center widget you could turn on for NFC reading and stuff. It disappeared, but the NFC tags still work. The NFC 215 tags still work on iPhone right now. It's just kind of undocumented, but that would allow a workaround right now for people to take payments. Maybe not quite as smoothly as Apple Pay, but you would be able to click an NFC tag. A link could pop up on your phone, and then you click that link, and it could do whatever you like, basically, including take payments. So it's interesting that obviously the EU got there just before Apple completely removed it, because they kind of removed from the front end, but not completely disappeared. Because I use it daily. So.
Yep. Okay, then. Next up is from CoinDesk. Solana's network suffered another outage on Saturday, lasting 7 hours, when NFT minting tool called Candy Machine was hit with bots, leading to about 4 million requests per second. It wasn't immediately clear how the bot traffic overcame network safeguards.
When's the last time that happened on Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with these systems that are competing to replace the kind of legacy systems. Is if you're not able to keep uptime, you're going to hang on that, especially if it happens multiple times. That's kind of that doesn't help your cause. Anyway, the next article is Spain says its prime minister and defense minister's phones were infected by Pegasus, which will be investigated by Spain's highest criminal court. So the question is, who hacked the prime minister and defense ministers of Spain?
And why?
And why? Who and why? I guess we're going to find out. The Spanish government has said that the mobile phones were both infected last year with Pegasus spyware that its manufacturers claim is available only to state agencies. In a hastily convened press conference on Monday, the minister for the presidency said that the president's phone was targeted in May and June 2021, and the other guy in June 2021, data was extracted from both phones. These facts have been confirmed and are irrefutable. I don't think now is the time to engage in supposition or conjecture about what the motivation may have been. Why the fuck not? The phones of other members of the government are being examined to determine whether they may also have been targeted. Last month, someone told The Guardian the alleged targeting constituted a violation of individual rights, an attack on democracy, and a threat to political dissent. The Spanish government has promised an internal investigation into the alleged targeting of Catalan activists. Oh, now you're getting domestic political weirdness going on there with Catalonia and the Catalan wanting independence and everything. It's going to get really weird really quickly. Anywho, I guess I hope we do find out. I'm really curious to know, because what's interesting about this is NSO claims it only sells it to governments. Okay, well then Spain wouldn't have been hacking itself ostensibly, so what countries, this is going to cause some interesting friction between Spain and somebody. The question is who. Okay, next up is the Wall Street Journal. It says they have sources that location data of millions of Grindr users were collected from a digital ad network and sold since at least 2017, so 5 years. Grindr says it has cut the data flow. So this sounds like a journalist did what they should do and went a little deeper no pun intended, on that priest who was outed. If you remember that story from Jesus 6, 7, 8 months ago, there was a priest who was outed for using Grindr based on his location data. And that was a Vice story, if I remember correctly, and I think I do. And the point is, well, however that was found can be applied to pretty much anybody. And so that's what appears to have now happened, is they went ahead and did this, and to see just how broad this could be extrapolated. And yeah, you could, the data is on that Grindr's doing this. That's how that person was outed. So if Grindr's doing this, yeah, make a bigger story out of it and make it go above and beyond this individual priest who got outed. That this is part of their business model. That's what we learned in that first story. And this just kind of makes it a little more plain. Gay, and the issue is that it's a gay dating app. So it makes it, if you have the location data and you combine it with a couple of other data points, you can essentially out people who don't want to be outed. There's a lot of gay people who are in the closet, and this data jeopardizes that, like it did with the priest. So that's why it's of such concern. Of course, this is happening on all kinds of apps, probably apps like Tinder as well. All kinds of apps. But, this is particularly more sensitive, people being in the closet and being potentially outed. So it says the gay dating apps user locations were collected and sold via an ad network since at least 2017. Grindr says it has curtailed the data it shares. All right. Next up, internal Federal Trade Commission, the FTC survey, overall satisfaction among staff has dropped from 89% in 2020 to 60% in 2021. Well, what happened since 2020? Lena Khan took over as the chair of the FTC. That's the most notable thing that happened. That's a pretty significant drop in overall satisfaction, from about 90% to 60%. In an email, Lena Khan pledges to fix shrinking staff morale. Under both Republican and Democrat administrations, the FTC has consistently ranked in the top 5 agencies, but probably not anymore now that it's at 60%. Washington Post says hacking Russian targets was once considered off limits by some, but after invading Ukraine, Russia has been hit by an unprecedented wave of cyber attacks. Experts anticipated a Moscow-led cyber assault. Instead, unprecedented attacks by hacktivists and criminals have wreaked havoc in Russia. Is the story there.
That's something we're going to be hearing about for a long time here. We've been monitoring this for weeks, just what's happening there. Because at the end of this war, you just got to wonder, we're getting access to so much data and tools because of these hacks. I mean, it's amazing. There was a data dump of data from a Russian bank last week, which is just amazing, the amount of information that's available. So you just got a question about what's going to happen with all these hacktivists when the Ukraine war is over.
Yep.
Because they're learning so much by, having free access to hacking Russian sites. I mean, it's a free-for-all right now. It really is. It's kind of scary.
Let's see here. What do these other sources have to say? A YouTuber is promoting DDoS attacks on Russia. How legal is this? A YouTube influencer with hundreds of thousands of subscribers is encouraging followers to conduct cyber warfare against Russia. In a plea made this week on his channel, the YouTuber demonstrated how viewers could download a free pen testing tool called Liberator and stop that Russia propaganda machine. Albeit the cause might seem worthwhile and appealing, how legal are DDoSs or calls to participate? And can users get in trouble? In a YouTube video streamed Thursday, a vlogger who has over 268,000 subscribers thought sought everyone's help in stopping Russia propaganda amid Kremlin's ongoing invasion in Ukraine. The YouTube video in question thus far has generated over 86,000 views at the time of the writing. Quote, I need your help to support Ukraine. For the past few weeks, there have been numerous disinformation campaigns and fake news from the Russian government, says the YouTuber. These fake news flooded the media and had different effects around the globe. Very rarely do I ask people for help, but this is a situation where you can join the cyber warfare against Russia to stop the Russian propaganda machine.
In fact, it is illegal. The thing is that there are an investigation against 4 young people in Sweden that have participated in similar attacks lately, directed towards Russian interests that actually have been caught by the Swedish IT criminal police.
Okay. Next up, Mozilla. Who makes the browser and email client. Analysis of 32 mental health and prayer apps show that 29 out of the 32 mental health and prayer apps have lax privacy and security practices. Lacks privacy and security practices and collect large amounts of data. So this isn't a huge surprise if you've been following along from the beginning. These free apps in the App Store that are specifically about prayer apps and mental health, they're going to find a way to monetize your stupid ass, and this is where your data comes in. And so 29 out of 32 of these apps have very lax security practices and collect large amounts of data. Prayer
And
apps were,
Tyler,
yes.
did you notice? So I had that wonky idea when Ellen tweeted about Wellbutrin, and I thought about the data capture that's behind these mental health applications that are a source for profit. And I thought, is this his next venture? It's just open season in that industry right now.
So the article says the vast majority of mental health and prayer apps are exceptionally creepy. According to Mozilla, they track, share, and capitalize on users' most intimate personal thoughts and feelings like moods, mental state, and biometric data. So when you are using a mental health app and you say, I'm feeling depressed, ding, 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 congratulations, you just made that app a bunch of money because they have a whole bunch of advertisers who are trying to target people who feel depressed. And now you know why there's so many free mental health apps in the app stores. Because this is very valuable data that they are essentially doing lead gen on you and all of your mental health issues.
Don't they have to confirm on a privacy policy of whatever they are operating, like if they are operating in the US, or if in the EU they have to comply with the GDPR or something like that? And isn't that the violation of that
No.
privacy policy?
Absolutely, they must comply, and they must put in writing that we do these bad things. And here's a little button that says, I agree. And of course, you read that and said, fuck it, I'm going to click I agree anyways.
Likely you didn't read it and clicked I agree.
What? Hang on.
Yeah, most
Wait.
of us do. Yeah, I'm
Sharon,
telling you,
Sharon,
Tyler. Do you
Something
read
about that
everything
fine
wait.
that
print
Are
you
you guys
agree?
saying
related to it, Tyler.
are you
Do
saying you
you do
don't
you
read every word of the user license agreements before clicking?
Absolutely not. I actually nowadays, after the Facebook thing, whatever. What was that they sold the data during the campaign or something for the British company? But anyway, after that, I try to pay attention before clicking agree when I'm downloading app or something, and it's impossible. So unless I really, really, really have to, I don't. Unless I desperately need that app, I don't agree. And if you don't agree, the problem is you don't get the full functionality of that app. That's the problem.
Oh,
So
you can't even progress to the next screen. So if you don't agree, it's like, sorry, your device is a paperweight. Thanks for playing.
exactly. So this is the problem. I remember in the Obama administration after the subprime mortgage crash, that I think, what is that, Warren, Elizabeth Warren and others fought to get the mortgage. When you sign mortgage, you have like about like 5 pages of very small print that you sign. Most of us don't even read, to make it really big font so that people think it's part of the mortgage agreement, so you read it before you sign it. But I honestly wonder, like, if they can make this app privacy policies like big enough for all of us to pay attention and read it. I don't know, something got to be done, because I am at the moment getting a lawyer to write our privacy policy, and he's asking me a ton of things. And every single like third party we are partnering with, and if that third party is going to sell investors data and financial data and things like that, I have to tell the lawyer all those things that we will be doing with, and I can't violate that, otherwise they will shut me down. So I'm just wondering if, like, learning all these little things, um I'm just wondering if people are really aware of all those data, or we just click it, especially if you are mental, having mental issues, and you really desperately need help. You're not going to read all those things, and you're probably saying, you know what, it's an app, no one is going to see it, so let me get consulting. So it's terrible what they are doing. They need to be much more sympathetic for these people who in their time of need. Anyway, that's my rant for now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I agree with you, and it's also not necessary to collect all this data from people. I mean, we figured out ways, and I know that we are for sure, like, we are not the only people to analyze mental health in a way that you don't have to collect all this data from people. Like, it's not necessary. It's really just to have a front that you pretend to do something good and get data from people to make money on that. It's really not there for actually helping people with mental health disorders, because there are ways to do this without the need for all of this data from people.
Yeah, but they want that. Well, there's a couple of things that you guys are talking about. There's 2 points here. It's one, privacy. Are you disclosing and getting permission for what you're collecting and using it for? And the other one, I think, was security here. They don't monitor all of the apps. They try to, but again, that was the big news. Was it last week or the week before? And again, that John Oliver report about all the nefarious gray zone third party cookies that also collect data that are in a gray zone that's not even in the privacy policy. But privacy policies have very standardized terms, and so no, people don't read them anymore. Their eyes glass over because they all say the same thing. But Messi, there are third party terms that are very standard. I'm surprised your attorney is asking you about every single vendor, because you just say we use third party vendors, plural, to support or provide our service. Those vendors aren't supposed to use that data for their own purposes. They're supposed to use it for your service, and you're responsible for contracting and following through editing that. There's also, when we've done this with a couple of privacy policies and pulled them apart, and if it says something like Facebook's says we collect your data for use in our services, and that service with a little s means that they can use that on anything that Facebook provides. So is it WhatsApp, Instagram, Metaverse, whatever they're doing, they can use it anywhere that entity is providing that service now and in the future. And if you actually read Facebook's or TikTok's, they say we can pull everything from, if you've signed in with your other social media credentials, we can pull all your data from that other site. So TikTok's pulling your information from Instagram. It also says we can pull your followers' information if you've got friends and you've granted us access to them, we will pull their social media as well. I mean, these things slightly, no one reads them, obviously, and they have very generalized, nicey sounding terms that we're doing this to help you. But if you read it and see how deep and pervasive these are, yes, they have massive profiles on you individually or you as a group. And then it goes back to how they use it. So you're going to tie that back to the new Digital Marketing Act that's coming out in the EU. They cannot individually target you based on what they know about you, what who you are, your preferences, etc. I haven't read the act, so I don't know how targeted they can get, whether they can target aggregated groups like women 18 to 30 tend to like this, and you're in that group versus, Katarina, you're in that group. Um, we haven't seen that yet, but again, this is just a huge area. And so, and also, Messi, I would be careful with how much you're paying an attorney for all of this. It's more around the security and just disclosing the practices and then auditing your vendors. So,
Can you
Yeah.
speak,
Well,
Jennifer?
thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, I was just surprised. Yeah, I will look into clothes, but from my understanding is that not necessarily what the third parties are doing and stuff, but in our privacy policy, we need to mention which third parties were we using, so that the user, before clicking agree and proceed with our platform, they would be aware of what parties we're using, and then if they are conscious about their privacy policy, they would go to these third parties and see the third party's privacy policy. And also, I mean, we need to be clear in terms of if we are going to be using this data for ad purposes and things like that. Apparently, it has to be declared or mentioned in that policy before people can click agree, especially if our third party is a party that is gonna is an ad based third party where they may use that user information to make ads. So yeah, I mean, I'm learning every day. So thanks, Jennifer.
Just a tax on startups. The big boys are being regulated and themselves in place. It's very unfair that you should have to carry that burden, especially when you're a young company. It's really just not, in my opinion, it's not a level playing field. The regulations are favoring the behemoths. The only way to solve this, of course, is with zero knowledge proofs, and where you don't store any data about the customer, but the customer can provide you with information that enables you to customize the service to their needs.
Absolutely, but the challenge is, like you said, we don't have it right now, and we have to comply. And to comply, these are the policies actually, and we even have to tell them that if we have a third party if we have a vendor or third party that's based on the EU, because then that vendor or whatever have to be compliant to the GDPR, which is the EU's own privacy policy and data security. So anyway, I don't want to hang the mic
yeah,
on that.
but let's see, I would look at this. The things that you've described, it really depends on your use of that data. So if you're collecting data and then giving it to third parties as part of your service versus using those parties as vendors for you to provide the service to the end user, it sounds like you're describing a different use there. And also, as to the vendors and their compliance, you contractually agree with those vendors. You do. If you're using EU regulated data and you have service providers that will access that data or be given that data, you have to have contracts in place, data protection agreements with those vendors. And I don't know what your service is. So you have normally the contractual obligation via your privacy policy to your end users that you are collecting data from. And if you give that data to a third party, it's your obligation to make sure that those third parties comply with whatever obligations you have with the end user. They don't usually have to go to that third party's website and check their privacy policies. I don't know what your offering is, and we don't need to get into that. But it is, and also as Nicholas said, that the big behemoths are the ones that lobbied and created these laws and got favorable laws for them, and also have 6,000 attorneys each, and so it is a big tax on startups. It also they doesn't apply. These laws don't apply to every company, right? You have to be of a certain size financially or doing a certain amount of business. So GDPR applies to certain size businesses, and same with all the state laws in the U.S. So, and again, those ones all conflict with each other. So that makes it again very complex. Or they don't
Okay,
conflict; they're just not the same.
moving on. The next one,
Tyler,
yes.
real quick,
Okay.
Jennifer, HIPAA, can you just speak to if these are mental health apps? You know, what would be not even a best practice? What's the legal requirements for these apps to abide by HIPAA standards?
HIPAA
HIPAA's
applies to
only in the US.
healthcare providers. Yeah, HIPAA's U.S. and it applies to healthcare providers. And I do think mental health apps fall under that. And I think that also the HIPAA is being extended to apply to fitness apps. So like all those apps that are capturing your biometrics and that kind of health, HIPAA is being extended to explicitly apply to those. But I don't know that HIPAA's
Can
got
I?
a lot of
Yeah,
teeth.
can I weigh in on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is John. Um, so I know the primary authors of HIPAA quite well, and they did the best they could under the circumstances, knowing that it was incomplete. HIPAA is woefully outdated in terms of its protections. Um, Getting updates to it to accommodate the fact that with machine learning, you can re-identify people in a heartbeat despite HIPAA redactions that are required by law. So being HIPAA compliant um, is a good way to protect re-identification by humans, but it is woefully inadequate for re-identification by machines. And so it is necessary, but far from sufficient for the kinds of protections needed. Just as simple examples, you can't put in someone's, when you HIPAA redact, you take out their name, their zip code, their phone number, their employer, things like that. But the fact that in the free text of the document, it says they're having issues with their boss, whose name is George, who at a company so and so, it becomes very easy to re-identify people. And there's Latanya Sweeney is at Harvard has published extensively on how easy it is to re-identify people with machines. So HIPAA doesn't begin to address those issues.
I wanted to add to John's point and agree that these protections are a flimsy gauze when you have a massive correlating entity as well. So not only is the information itself insecure and you can re-identify people under HIPAA, but under any circumstance, information that is held by a Facebook or a Google or an Apple is so easily to correlate the other information that it basically is a total fiction. And so it really is almost a pure tax because they have a massive asymmetry and they never ever delete that data. They retain that data forever.
And just as a side comment, when you're logging onto any website and it says, what was your first car? Where did you go to high school? What is your mother's maiden name? That information is traded to do those cross correlations. So there's a market for those answers to your personal questions that help validate. So it's not unreasonable to use different answers on different websites to the same questions to obscure that cross linkage between them.
Yeah, just use a different thing. Like, what was your first dog? It's like Henry 5642 dash underscore asterisk, and then you'll be
Wow,
fine.
that was my dog's name.
Me too.
Okay, so the next story is that Google confirms it fired another AI researcher, and this researcher was fired after Google declined to publish the researcher's paper, which was kind of the point of the paper was as a rebuttal to a much celebrated other paper, which is all about the claims that AIs will surpass humans in their ability to design chips and things like that. So this
This is what
Google,
we were saying the other day, right? About who writes the research and then who controls the release of that research. It's just amazing.
The scientist was reportedly allowed to collaborate on a paper disputing claims. Well, let's go in order here. They were disputing or challenging earlier findings that computers could design some chip components more effectively than humans. That's what they were challenging. Google hasn't detailed why it fired the researcher, but it told the New York Times he'd been terminated with cause. It also maintained that the original paper had been thoroughly vetted and peer reviewed, and the study challenging the claims did not meet our standards. So they didn't want to publish their own AI researcher's paper because it didn't meet their own quote unquote rigorous standards. And he was challenging something that was already rather celebrated and peer reviewed. And so the researcher said, well, I'm going to take this to the CEO, Sundar Pichai. And that's when he was let go, because perhaps that's some sort of breach of protocol, I imagine, to kind of go bothering the CEO about such matters.
Yeah, that's risky. I think sometimes it's appropriate to reach out to the head honcho or the big cheese, but other times I think corporations like Google have very rigid structures, and there's reasons why you don't want to waste the CEO's time because their time is worth much more. So it's definitely something that shouldn't have been done, but it's unfortunate that he got let go for something so trivial, which is like fighting for the right to publish. So.
I'm sorry, I don't
Being
understand it
surprised.
at all. If you publish a paper that goes through peer review and you basically say that's the latest knowledge base we have about this topic, and then you continue to follow up on your research, and the research shows something different, maybe even opposing. If you started publishing stuff like this on the first end, you kind of have the ethical obligation to update that, because you now know that this is not true anymore. It's the same thing when you do a study and people run all kinds of different controls, and some people say, okay, let's not repeat this, or let's not run more controls. The data looks good as it is. Now it's publishable in like a big ass journal. If we run now this experiment, we might run into the problem that this is not supporting our story anymore. So let's just not run the experiment so we don't know about it. So we don't have the moral obligation or the ethical obligation to publish this. This is already wrong. But this is a step below wrong of what they are doing, because they run more models and whatnot. And now they know that the real knowledge about this topic that they have is updated, right? So they have actually the ethic obligation to publish this. But on the other hand, I'm telling you, this happens also at academia, because I lost a job because of exactly something like this. Before I was a PhD student, the PI told me to not publish what I found out because it was against what a postdoc a couple of years before published. And as a postdoc, I went ahead and published anyways, and then I was in big trouble. So, yeah, so this happens everywhere. But if you once start publishing a story, and if you have updated results that kind of go against the story, you have the ethical obligation to actually either amend the paper or write a follow-up paper or whatnot.
You could have written an anonymous paper. You could have said, look, I'm going to write this under a pseudonym. So that's one way. If it was really important that the information be out there, but if it was some sort of personal, I guess, career type
How would it get
advancement.
published without an affiliation and anonymous? Try it. It's rather impossible. As a preprint, not even as a preprint.
Yeah, I meant more as a preprint so that you at least get the information out there. I know, for example, like the Bitcoin paper, Satoshi Nakamoto may or may not be a real person or a collective of people. So that's one way to do it if you really feel strongly about it.
I think the one thing that it highlights is that you have to look at the incentives within every structure. So we were talking the other day about A16Z, backing a research lab or whatever it was. And at the end of the day, the employees are either going to do what the people that set the incentives want, i.e., the corporation or the investor. And even in the case of a university, if the university has powerful donors that fund the research, etc., and name buildings, again, this is the way that we corrupt our institutions. This is the way that we have find ourselves in the post-truth and then the post-trust world, is that people say, well, can you really trust the research from Stanford? Someone was criticizing Stanford the other day, I remember on the call, for its origin story. And ultimately, this is a major problem, is that we come to consensus through this information that is from a qualified individual. And the question is, who is in charge of this information? And should anyone be in charge of this information, and how does one come to consensus as to whether this is good research or bad research? In the case of this particular example, I think going over the head of whoever was in charge to Sundar Pichai was probably a mistake of the employee who mistook a corporation for a research institution. And in a corporation, you don't go over your boss's head if you want to retain your role. So learning for them there.
Yeah, expensive lesson to learn. So it sucks.
Next up, Financial Times says that Lego plans to triple the number of software engineers on staff. Oh boy, holy smokes. How
Hell
many
yeah.
how many software here's a chance to play our favorite game we haven't played in a while. How many software engineers does Lego have?
220.
1,800.
I'm going to say 175.
2,000.
5,000.
10,000.
20.
2.
Three thousand.
Who was closest to 400?
I said
Two,
2.
I said 220.
Oh, you did. That Johan did say 220. To be fair, you're not that far from Copenhagen where they're based. So, but Lego plans to triple the number from 400 to 1,800, which somebody did guess because they saw the headline somewhere. They're planning to have 1,800 software developers for Lego. They're becoming a software company.
What are they
Yeah,
developing?
that
Met-
partnership with Epic Games, right? The metaverse. They really want to compete with Roblox.
They're
Exactly.
finally going after Roblox and Minecraft.
Yeah, and they have had some good series with the Star Wars Lego series as well. So I can guess that want to place more on that in-house.
If you're
Yeah,
watching, hang on, if you're Lego, right, and you're watching kids spending 10 hours a day going bananas on Roblox and Minecraft, which look like Legos, by the way, like a lot like Legos. You must be fuming fucking crazy that kids are not spending 10 hours a day with your Legos, and they're spending 10 hours a day with these digital Legos inside their screens. That's got to be driving Lego absolutely bananas.
You should be aware that Lego was one of the ones that were after Minecraft before Microsoft bought them, but they did get turned down. I think they didn't offer enough money to the
Oh,
guy.
they tried to buy it. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. They've been trying to keep up, but they've just been swinging and missing for years now. It's surprising to me that they've waited this long to get their act together. Like this was something that was obvious 5, 6 years ago. So hopefully these 2,000 or so engineers approximately can really help Lego out. Because personally, Lego has a special place in my heart. It was the first toy that I played with. Quite literally, it shaped the way that I try to solve problems. So if we can do that for another generation of kids, but somehow implement the metaverse, I think that's a good.
They can easily build the Lego metaverse, right? Because you have so many things, so many. I mean, they have the
Can
real
I
theme park.
contribute
Yep.
after?
Go
Sure.
ahead.
Yeah, I have twins. They're 8 years old. I haven't let them use too many mechanical devices, or sorry, technology devices. So Ben might appreciate that. But here's what I did. There's a, I'll make it tech news relevant. There's a store that sells used toys that has a bunch of Legos, and they sell Lego characters as a mix. Like, I don't care which ones they are. My kids are creative enough to play with the regular Pokemon. I don't need to buy this fancy Pokemon, right? So, I this Anna's Toys Depot, I've never watched their channel, but because I've been driving Uber in Austin for so long, I've gone into this place. I know about it, and my kids go ape shit when I go buy extra characters. So the, they're I did want to just applaud that our child's formation of creativity can be, in an analog sense, very material, but it's interesting that they're not really engaged with so much of the building anymore. They have if Lego can capitalize on this and bring that element to the metaverse, kids are certainly in character mode when they're young.
I think there's a great opportunity here for the metaverse component to have a physical component represented. So the match there could be really interesting to have a component that either has some NFC component or tracking or some I don't know QR code on it that corresponds to a physical. The physical object has QR code that corresponds to a digital object in the metaverse. I think that would also be very clever because it would help you kind of piggyback off of that process back and forth and not just have them glued to the screens all the time.
Eric, they already have that for about 5 years. It's called Lego Dimensions, using exactly NFC tags and characters that pop into the game, and you pop physical objects on. You build a kit out of Lego. You make like a portal or something. You pop little characters on it that have NFT tags up their bums, and and then things pop into the world. So that already exists. Lego Dimensions.
Oh, that's
I
awesome.
always, I always thought there was some tight contradiction because we've got buckets of Lego for that the kids loved making, and obviously it moved from the free play. What really sent Lego into the stratosphere was moving from free play, where you would make up what you would do with the blocks, to branded characters that you make things that are from movies, etc., like the Star Wars, Harry Potter, whatever else. There was a licensing opportunity. And I always felt that they could enable you to make other things with those pieces, because obviously they were not specific pieces, and that you should be able to recombine them to make all different sorts of characters, but they never give you, like a blueprint for figuring that out. And obviously, the reason is they want to sell you the branded pieces because they therefore sell more of their products. So part of adding technology affects their ability to sell you the new set.
Yeah, there is a distinction though with like normal commercial Lego and then the education kits. They have more of those universal components that allow you to build more than just what's on the box there. So there is that, but that's in a separate store. You have to know to go to the education section. It's a separate website, kind of like education pricing for Apple. So it's a little bit silly that they keep it hidden away there.
Well, actually, most Lego kits have fairly universal pieces in them, but every Lego kit has at least one piece that's only in that kit, we've noticed. Now owning probably nearly every fucking Lego kit for the kids. Yeah, not quite.
And they
Obviously
won't throw
joking.
it away. I've got buckets of it.
Yeah, there's always one piece though that's only in that kit. Yeah.
So what I do is I skip that layer, guys. I just go buy the used pieces that are interchangeable because I don't even let my kids get hooked on the crack of Star Wars only pieces. I saw that my kids weren't able to keep the Spider-Man set I bought at Costco together, and I did it at that price point. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to keep buying the basic blocks, let them free play, and now I can buy these characters secondhand, and they stay creative. They don't care for that unless you make them train you into habituating to buying them that crap. That's what I'll
Well,
say.
it sounds like your kids trained you to at least get those pieces, so there is some sort of training happening.
On year 4, I got them 10 more people where they only had 6 before, and they went ape shit. So they didn't train me. I've staggered my time series quite well as a former financial planner. So I've economized where I could, but I didn't do it until they kept playing with their Legos. Is to the whole point of this, the reason I brought this up.
So isn't this a metaverse press release? So my point or question is going to be around. So now we're talking about a smaller headset for smaller skulls, right? So that'll be interesting. That whole market. And then how cool are we with that in one sense, right? Because it is a Trojan horse to a whole bunch of other apps and things. And so I'd kind of there's one kind of big point. And the other point is simply with regards to this ever emerging market that is most recently called the metaverse. It was VR and all that. Is Lego? The Lego video games have historically made a killing, not just with Star Wars, but Lord of the Rings over the past several gaming platforms. So it will be interesting because all these companies that jump into gaming, there's always a come to Jesus after throwing so much money into it. After a couple years, you start to get games into the market, and do they sell enough and things like that. Games is not an easy business, so that'll be if we could jump into a time machine and fast forward 2 years to see really how big was this how many units did this thing drive. So in any case, those are two kind of points I'd like to share.
I think the partnership with Epic. Epic is really good at partnering with other companies and leveraging resources in a very efficient way to say, hey, look, you have a small engineering team. We have a few engineers. And then they kind of do this, I don't know what to call it, but like a trade where their engineers kind of give extended support and they really collaborate to try to get these, especially now that Apple has kind of given them the cold shoulder, they really depend on these partnerships. So oddly enough, the pressure from Apple, I think, only makes these kinds of efforts that much stronger. So, yeah, very exciting. It will be interesting to see in 2 years.
Alrighty. So the next one I have today is the New York Times is doing a story about Johnny Ives and the whole. It's a recap of a book called After Steve, where it talks about why John. They're highlighting the parts why Johnny Ive left Apple, and essentially he had some differences with Tim Cook. Particularly, they highlight Johnny's plans for how to launch the Apple Watch. Is how they kind of start off the whole story. Anyway, the next one is that it says European game publisher Embracer, which, by the way, happens to be Swedish.
Hey, Tyler, sorry. Where was that article on?
New York
The one
Times.
about Johnny Ives? Okay.
Sure. The next is, and Cheryl pinned it to the top of the room here. Thank you, Cheryl. The next is that Swedish game publisher Embracer buys Square Enix's 3 Western game studios with many game series, including Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, and all of their intellectual property for $300 million. The deal includes over 50 classic games rights and over 1,000 developers. And for those who haven't been following along with Embracer, they're rolling up the game space in a huge, huge way. Let me see if there's more. I'm trying to see if we can get. They own just a ridiculous number of games at this point. Over 50,000 games, consoles and accessories, and this massive conglomeration of big studios. And now they're at 12. The group has 119 internal game development studios. Jesus Christ.
Talk about
And,
meta.
and over 12,500 employees. So that's like the size of Twitter by comparison. and contracted employees in more than 40 countries. Its parent company, the group has extensive catalog of over 850 franchises. With its head office in Karlstad, Sweden, the group has a global presence through its 10 operative groups, names them all, and 119 internal game development studios. Jesus Christ. That's a lot of game studios. Wow. So,
And they've just acquired more.
So I
right.
wonder if the problems of the game industry are going to be addressed because they always get sexism and other issues. So I wonder to what extent the industry will respond with these kind of acquisitions because Microsoft kind of just kept quiet when they did their set of acquisitions. So
The thing to keep in mind, I mean, we brought the point up one time previously where the future of the metaverse and the way that games are merging head on with movies and films inside the metaverse. Um, I mean, one way to think of it is you have two distinct forms of popular content. You have TV and film, and then you have video games to oversimplify it. And the question is, as we move forward into the future, those two things get closer and closer together. The TV and film production becomes more and more computerized, digitized, 3D modeled, etc. And the video games become more and more higher resolution, more and more, um, you know, in lifelike. So at some point they'll cross, and the question is, who's in a better position to create the content of the metaverse? I think it's a fairly obvious answer that these video game studios are in the pole position when it comes to creating the content of the metaverse because it would cost probably a multiple more for the Hollywood like TV and film producers to create metaverse content than it would for the video game producers. The video game producers can do it. It's just sort of a natural extension of what they've been doing for decades. So here comes the metaverse. The video game development studios are the obvious talent pools to build the metaverse. And so this Embracer is kind of starting to build the most impressive cadre of talent for building the metaverse is one way to think of it, which by the way is not just video games, it's every fucking thing, like education, like your job, like all your every I mean ostensibly we'll be doing everything in the metaverse. It's all e-commerce, it's everything, it's the entire goddamn internet. So there is a very good argument to be made about why they're willing to spend $300 million here and another billion there and another billion here, and Mark Zuckerberg better watch the fuck out because this is an incredibly compelling pool of talent of 12,500 some game developers. Yes.
yeah, I
I was
think
going to
there's
say,
an interesting opportunity here for somebody like Steam. So Steam came out with their Steam Deck recently and caught Nintendo off guard. Like quite literally, it's very shocking because the device is able to run a whole suite of emulation software of Nintendo titles. So it's an interesting thing to see that okay, if somebody like Steam can make hardware, could they also make a VR headset? How much harder would it be for them to compete with somebody like or like Meta or Facebook, especially given that the talent is moving around so much? So yeah, definitely something to keep an eye out for.
Eric, is
because
that
I
Steam
was
it?
going to,
I wouldn't say that's something to keep an eye out for. I would say that that's the deal breaker for Meta. I would be concerned if I were Meta because Meta's not designed to pivot into the space that it's in, not as well as Embracer is, right? Unless they purchase Embracer out, they have a huge competitive hurdle to sort of climb, And financially, I don't see them having the bandwidth for that. So this is going to be quite interesting. This is one of those stories that shows first to move is not always guaranteed to succeed.
I was going to say
Napster.
I was going to make 3 points. Point number one, the video game business is already bigger than Hollywood. Number two, the creation of characters that are hyper real and can be animated will negate the power of star power. You see it now where you've got voiceovers on animated characters. You don't need the actors per se. Once you get the deep fake machine learning that enables you to capture the syntax and sound of characters. For example, on a recent movie I watched, they replaced the voice of Andy Warhol on the documentary on Netflix with an AI version of Andy Warhol who narrated his own documentary, post death. So that just shows that AI will replace a lot of those roles that are Hollywood roles. And then the third point I
But
was going to
Nicholas,
make
they
is
have to pay the estate for that voice. I mean,
indeed, but you can have de novo characters that are created by video companies that own those identities. Like Pikachu is not a real character, but is has mimetic value.
no,
Um,
I just want to the voiceovers like for Pixar when they
understood,
get Tom
understood,
Hanks, they get paid
understood,
better money than average people. Yeah, okay.
understood. But I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
but
in
the
the future,
licensing
you
for
won't need.
splitting. Sorry, go ahead.
uh, and the final point that I was going to make was that, of course, those who are in the FX business, so we work with and discuss things with John Getter, who was the Academy Award winner for The Matrix and for the FX, and those guys have always been in the crossover mode, especially in the sci-fi arena, and linking it back, point four, to the previous story, which was the technocrats versus the creatives. So Johnny Ive in that situation is the creative, and Tim Cook is the technocrat. And when you get to large scale organizations, the technocrats take over and the creatives leave. And then you enter into level five of the game, which is the M&A world, where VCs who backed your company encourage you to sell out to Disney, and Disney acquires the sum of all of the hard work that you did, because the whole point was to make money, and then the process starts again.
Yeah, and that does. I forget who said that just a few minutes ago. The There's a saying that the early pioneers get the arrows in the back, and the later settlers get the land. And oftentimes, look, there's a tsunami of people are coming into this space. There's nothing you can do about it. It's going to happen. And sometimes the best way to play it is pick and shovel plays, right? The ones that are building all the infrastructure for these things to happen.
Protocols are the way forward.
This digital Hollywood thing's been literally unfolding for 3 decades. I wrote the business plan for Crystal Dynamics. It catalyzed. That was back. Anybody remember the CD-ROM? Using,
Yes.
this idea
Yes.
of doing interactive stories has been around for literally, it's like 30 years ago this year, next year. Strauss Zelnick was a very famous studio exec. I forget if he was with Columbia Pictures or which one of the big studios. He later went on to be the CEO, and he's been in games ever since, if I recall correctly. But it's great that all this excitement with Mr. Zuckerberg has brought so much excitement to this again. But I'll totally agree with Tyler with regards to who is in the best position to make the most engaging content are clearly the games people. but this, with this metaverse and even Oculus and all these things have been around for a few years now, and as a specific platform in the gaming space, it's still small potatoes in the bigger game space with regards to platforms and things like that. So it's and also having spent quite a bit of time in interactive TV space, that later there were waves of VCs that went into the interactive TV space before Netflix did a pivot with their mail to home DVD and kind of really catalyzed video on demand. So it's just interesting how these things unfold, and they never unfold the way you think, and it always takes longer and things like that. Sorry, just wanted to throw a few other
Yeah,
twists into this.
The metaverse actors kind of get screwed. I was at a talk once by Ubisoft, and they said, they'll take the chin from this actor and the forehead from that actor, and therefore the cost of putting that character together is much cheaper because the licensing deal is much more lucrative from the perspective of the studio compared to the actor. So it's a weird thing to see like a synthetic human made from other parts, but now we see those purely digital humans that you don't even know what the source material is for that. So definitely a problem for actors, I think.
Okay, here we go. Next up is Apple's Q2 warning that supply shortages could hurt sales by up to $8 billion is a sign of overdependence on China for final device assembly, testing, and packaging. Apple products are primarily assembled in China, and that's brought headaches in recent years, including supply chain woes in the latest quarter. And by the way, we've seen significant de-risking by China into both Vietnam and India in recent quarters. How did they know? How did Apple know? Apple's already got balls rolling in Vietnam and in India. We've already seen headlines of Apple's new campus in India that ostensibly had safety standard issues, health standard issues, if you remember the articles from a month or two ago. How is it possible that Apple knew that they must have started planning this stuff a year ago? How did they know a year ago when we were starting tech news around the world that they should be de-risking their position in China? Which seems brilliant today that they have these new facilities in Vietnam and India, especially in light of this headline we're reading right now, that a whole bunch of people are over-dependent on China.
Oh, well, no, I think that they've
They
had
could read the
some supply
political.
issue. I'm sorry. I think they had supply issues prior to with China. That's one, two, and I think that the pandemic probably extended or maybe even accelerated some of their exit strategies. But I don't think that it was too hard to read that over dependence on China would cause issues in the future, and particularly since we saw Japan making that move even before the pandemic, we saw other companies thinking about aligning with other areas, but really realizing that those areas didn't have the market, the talent to sort of withstand business. But these conversations have been happening for some time now.
Apple is a nation state player. The government will obviously care to inform Apple when policies are moving against a nation state, and that was pretty much well in evidence since the Trump administration. So they would have known to diversify their supply chains, and it would have been years in the making. It's massively difficult to do that. What's upsetting, of course, is they're going to shift to another regime that is centrally controlled in India and will have to kowtow to Modi or another. So what it just shows you is that because of the way that our economies are structured, you cannot Apple cannot afford, because the customer cannot afford to have that product made in America or assembled in America, because the cost of the handset would be nearer $5,000 instead of $1,000.
Okay, next up is the Wikimedia Foundation decides to stop accepting cryptocurrency donations following community feedback. And there was an article, I don't know, a week and a half ago saying they were going to debate this. And now they've debated it, and now they're going along with the quote-unquote community's insistence that they should not accept cryptocurrency donations. Why? Because it's not green enough, was the reasoning.
It's such a perfect vector for those who want to follow and remain in a surveillance mode, that they just are using the sustainability argument. When there is a more sustainable solution, and they understand that, it will be interesting to see what they do to make the dollar hegemony and central bank control of money.
So the
Oh,
next
Tyler?
is, yes?
Just remember this moment for a second. I'm going to hop back to when Nicholas made the point about our hyper dependence on India, sort of switching the dependence from China to India. I think a couple articles later, you're probably going to come back and say, oh my God, you heard it first here at Tech News.
Okay. The next is that India's startup called Open, which is a neobank service for small, medium businesses. So not just a general run-of-the-mill neobank. It's a category-specific neobank for SMBs. Raises 50 million at a 1 billion valuation, making it India's latest unicorn and India's 100th unicorn. Well done, India. 100 unicorns. And they will probably have another 40 by the end of the year. It's truly incredible what's going on over there. And the next article is somewhat related. A startup called Cogni, a digital bank, you could call it a neobank, aimed at users between the ages of 18 and 35. Plans to launch crypto and Web3 focused banking services. Just raised 23 million. Why is that interesting? Because as I told you when we were just starting Tech News Around the World, that the neobanks would be able to, and you would start to see, and I know Cal would back me up on this prediction because I did it multiple times, that the neobanks would start specializing geographically, demographically, in every which way. You'll have black neobanks, gay neobanks, Muslim neobanks, you'll have all of them. And because they'll offer unique products and services to those demographics, as they should.
There's nothing new under the sun, as you know, Tyler.
Yeah,
In the old parlance, they would be called credit unions, and the
yes,
credit union movement has been around forever, and it's always related to the industry that you're in. And
yes.
so, what we're seeing is the rebranding of credit unions, but they're being regulated as banks or as neobanks, which is obviously the wrong way to regulate them, because if they set up as a credit union, they would have federal tax benefits, but they don't necessarily know that because they're being backed by VCs who want to try and steal the credit union business.
So
And just
the
one comment about India. I'm not surprised that they're so powerful now, because one statistic that there are more children in honor roll in India than there are children in America should leave us a little bit worried that this growth may keep going and eventually it will overtake the U.S. So I think the population game, if we're not careful about educating our children, it's going to be a problem.
Well, you
you
might
bring
want to look at the 300 million STEM graduates there are in China versus our paltry number.
Yeah, but our kids have always been kind of stupid.
I know that voice.
Have some faith. Have some faith.
Plus, we've got Chris Fornoff on our side, by the way.
We're all set.
Wait, what? I
Okay.
wasn't paying attention. What's going on? We were talking about how stupid our kids are here in America and how, like, we should
No,
be celebrating that they average even a 2.5 GPA.
Chris,
I
you're
would
just
be
saying
very
that
much
Oh,
you
against
good
have
that.
to see
you have
you.
increased the average IQ of Americans, so that's good.
IQ is eugenics. So I'll just start there. That's a whole other topic of things. Don't get me started.
But, I
Yeah,
mean,
don't get him started.
there's more than one way to skin that cat, because the Asian moms have figured out that you don't actually need to genetically modify the kids to make them kick ass on the SATs. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
there's alternatives, which is a whole lot
Corporal
of.
punishment.
Thunderdome
Not
deathmatch on the
accepted
piano
here,
and
though.
violin.
That's
Yeah,
just
but
enough
does that
to teach your
increase
kids.
intelligence and creativity? I think a lot of new studies speak against it. To just drill people into one specific direction doesn't necessarily increase creating innovation. And you can, I mean, it's still unargued that the US has the most patents every year.
If
The
everyone
most
was
patents accepted, not the most patents filed. I think China beat them last year, so it remains to be seen how large that momentum will be.
So the
I
last.
actually got this link
The
from BBS.
patents are only as good as the examiner, by the way, and you should look at the number they get, held up in court.
Very Go ahead.
briefly, BB sent me a link earlier this week on imperial examination. When I looked it up, with this the system of the bureaucracy system in China for how they minted mandarins or advisors to the emperor was really crazy. Is when I was reading through the criticisms of the system, this thing goes back like 1,000 years or so, and they're talking about complaining about having to write these these 8 paragraph essays and how and how unfair the school system was. And I'm just looking at them and going, wait a second, this sounds really familiar. I ended up tracing it out. It took me a few hours with stuff. I ended up finding out that this was actually a huge influence on the Enlightenment for the thinkers that ended up creating some stuff in Prussia, which a lot of people don't actually know. But if you look up the Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto, he actually covers how most of the American system actually was borrowed entirely from Russia. There was a very different system we had before then for like small schoolhouses that got changed over to a more mass public education. So there's actually a weird line of how you have ultra centralized bureaucracy as a form of education that goes much further back than most people realize. And what's hilarious is when you read these things that are 1,000 years old, and they have the same complaints that we've got today, and the same ups and downs, everything from student debt stuff to whether or not the schools aren't working during
Oh
different eras,
boy.
leading to declines of empires. It's crazy how much of a close corollary there is. Anyone can DM me if you want some citations. There's some fascinating stuff there.
No,
That
I
tells
just
us
want
a
to
lot
throw my
about how
hands up,
human
Chris. I
beings.
just want to throw it 1,000 years later and we still can't solve the problem. Let's just give it in.
That tells
Well,
us a lot
it's
about
not
human
true
beings,
that
though.
nobody can solve it. I mean, the Scandinavian countries are always the best in the PISA studies, which I don't think the US even participates in. But the PISA studies are from the UN, made to check which kids perform the best on like a larger intellectual context, not just how fast you do math calculations in your head, like not like if you're a good calculator but a good thinker. And Scandinavian countries are always on the higher end of the spectrum, and they, for example, just start real school with the age of 7, and before that it's playing and stories, and even then elementary school doesn't go for like this crazy hours with homework. I don't even think they have homework. And yeah, I don't know why we keep thinking that just drilling kids and from early ages makes them more efficient, like better thinkers in the future. I mean, we don't need efficient calculators anymore, or being very good at a very specific topic. AIs and robots will do that for us. So we really need more creative thinkers that have kind of a broad uh, logical thinking. And I don't know why we don't update our school system like the Scandinavians do.
A 10-second thing, abacus stuff can explain the majority of test differences between Asian cultures and European. It's just a better way of transferring things. We use spatial memory as opposed to Arabic numerals. It's just easier to think through. There's a few other things you can do university education at 12 years old. If you look at textbooks from fifth grade, where they say what fifth grade back in the day, they actually are on university level today. We intentionally do it badly because it's more useful for social structures. That's a longer topic, but yeah, I'm well over 10 seconds. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we need a little more critical thinking also, as opposed to just rote memorization of
Yeah.
facts.
I
So
think the
Just
I
children
have
are in a
TikTok,
more
right?
open system here in terms of being creative. The issue is that you still need, even though you've got AI and all of those other things, there have to be a group of people that write those and build those products, and they require specific knowledge as well as creative thinking. So coming up with an idea is one thing, but implementing it requires skills. And so those skills, if they're in the natural sciences, have to be learned and with some creativity, of course, but you can't have only creative people.
I like
you
how
could
someone in
Yeah,
the audience put
I
it
think.
where they said, I like how someone in the audience put it. He said on the chat, grade schools are mainly daycare in America, and that's not too far off.
that's a
I agree.
as a former LA Unified teacher, that's the most accurate description possible. It's
Yep.
they are daycares. That's what's going on in American schools at the moment.
By the
And
way,
Well,
and
not necessarily. I mean, my kids are in charter schools, and they enforce a lot of critical thinking, and math is about problem solving and so on. I mean, there are alternatives out there. Actually, our charter school system has also a high diversity, and we just got $100 million from Bloomberg actually for the model. I mean, there are other systems out there. It's just to
Sometimes
implement
it's hard
them.
to find, and sometimes it's very expensive. Yeah.
Let me
My
ask you
kids
this.
are in the number one charter school in LA, and it is, as Tyler and whoever else said, literally is daycare. They're really not learning a lot.
What, Katerina, is the teachers at that school compensated based on student performance?
I don't know. I send my kids there, and I'm happy about. I
Okay.
don't know if they are or
Yeah.
not.
I would
I
argue, and to overly simplify it for those, I mean, then there's rooms that go, I've been in Clubhouse about this, dedicated to this, but to oversimplify for those who have no real interest in it, the issue is from my perspective, again, oversimplification, is that the teacher unions basically have a situation where you'll go the LA Unified School District, for example, the teachers don't have to, and in fact, don't do anything all day long, all year long, and so no actual education happens, and they can't be removed for not doing anything. So that's sort of the problem in a nutshell. Anyway, I want to
so
go.
yeah.
I have two.
Can I
I
In
have
voice
the
two.
in as a
school,
parent?
I
You
actually have.
touched a nerve, Tyler.
I apparently did. I have to mute folks. I actually had 2 points that I wanted to add to the topic, which is I think the interesting possibility, and it's more than a possibility; it's inevitable on the future of education. Is at some point, and probably in the next 10 years, someone is going to figure out some incredibly clever personalized AI algorithms like my friends at Sauna Labs are doing in Stockholm. And I remember bringing in the founder CEO of Sauna Labs, this AI learning system that teaches people in twice the speed with 300% retention, for example. And as AIs are able to masterfully know what you know and the way that you learn, and tailor to the way that you learn and what you know based on what you know, can optimize exactly the next piece of data to improve your kind of um, corpus of information, um, in a way that no teacher could do in a room of 30 students. You could learn at a multitude of speed and comprehension. The country that adopts and wide scale promotes that first could have an interesting acceleration advantage. And similarly, the genetic engineering part as well could happen in our lifetime, where uh, if we do map out the genes related to learning abilities, and some country, I'll let you guess which ones, Norway, uh, go ahead and do genetic engineering on their future generations. With that in mind, um, the combination of those two things could happen in our lifetime, and we could see some really interesting. Uh,
E.O. Wilson
yeah,
E.O. Wilson, who was a Harvard uh, biologist, um, warned of this and named the new type of human Homo proteus, the augmented man. And you really, it's, you're absolutely right. This is absolutely going to happen, because you just have to look at how we've augmented ourselves with the mobile phone and the watch and the quantified self and the information that that's generating, so that we are no longer, if you asked a regular, younger person to get a map and, not use GPS and get to their friend's house, 15 miles away, using a map, it would be extremely difficult for them. So we've already lost skills, and we will continue to lose skills as we have expansion slots replaced by technology, including AIs. And this is why it's incredibly important that we have public AIs, so that people don't get left behind and are inferior humans, or Homo proteus, because they are not able to afford the expansion slot that makes you more valuable. And so we already have an inbuilt privilege that comes with having more one person having more capital than the other is that they can afford to educate their child. So you can think of that like an expansion slot that is paid for by money. Now imagine that that's an AI that is paid for with money that gives you an advantage over your fellow man. That's where we're going if we don't have public infrastructure, public technology infrastructure.
Okay. So the
Yeah,
next,
Tyler, there's an
yes,
interesting podcast. I think I referenced this last week or so that uh, Sam Harris does with Eric Schmidt about this, the uses of AI, because they get into the ethical issues. So if you're
yeah,
using it for teaching, it's going to have, again, biases, and we have to be very careful because if it furthers a child's thinking in one direction or furthers it in another direction versus just actually teaching. I mean, the use of teaching it so that you can individualize instruction is a great use case, but there's a lot to work out there. So if people are interested in that, it's a great podcast last week, I think.
okay.
I think a really relevant part to this conversation is what DeSantis is doing in Florida as well, and that whole kind of critical race theory. They're suggesting that due to critical race theory, they're removing and diminishing the role of social emotional learning curriculum in the math. Just as an example, in like math curriculum. And all of the actual experts in this space have been talking about the value of social emotional learning. And so, anyways, just another thing about the cultural learning, things like that.
So the last article that I read, if you have a sharp memory, was about the digital bank aimed at young folks 18 to 35 with plans to launch crypto and Web3 focused banking services because, the kids love the cryptos. The next article is from Bloomberg about a company called Yuga Labs, which just raised a few dollars, $320 million, by selling 55,000 virtual land plots in its other side metaverse, causing Ethereum blockchain ripple effects and skyrocketing gas fees. So Yuga Labs just sold 55,000 virtual land plots,
That
totaling
was huge. That
20
happened on
million.
Saturday night. That was
And
probably the
the
biggest news for the weekend. It
and the
just
fee
brought down the
base,
Ethereum blockchain,
correct, and
which we already know doesn't scale, but I'm just saying.
the
They've
fee
actually
base is
sold close.
$150 million of gas fees because of the gas price paradox that exists on Ethereum. So if you look at it as the tax paid, you just realize that it's obviously not the solution to Web3.
Well, for one plot of land, they were paying close to 3 ETH in gas fees at one point. Some
So
people were
by the
paying up
way,
to 12,000.
my monthly physical live event that I do, where I fly from Thailand to Stockholm to host a monthly event, as many of you know. And this month, the event is all about Web3. And so I'll be putting together a nice list of investors and entrepreneurs. Um, and well, no doubt we'll probably mention that particular article and many others on the topic. So looking forward to that. So that's
Tyler, you
March.
might want to also check out that article I sent you on what the UK decided last week.
NFT, oh, that's a great one. NFTs recognized as legal property in landmark case. And I love this type of headline because this is what ultimately matters. Is if two people are, let's use the real estate example, because there's a lot of hemming and hawing about NFTs for real estate, right? For you bought I've got a beach in Thailand. I've got an island in Thailand. By the way, you have that Bitcoin island that's going up for sale. And they're dividing it up into parcels of land based on NFTs, not surprisingly. And what happens if you buy the NFT of that land if the government, who really owns that land, by the way, doesn't recognize your NFT contract? So if the government, this is why, at the traditional way of doing things, whatever they may be, and they're different in every country, although rather similar. It's some paper-based thing that you sign, and there's words on the page, and there's a lawyer that reads it, and you sign it, and that's a contract that the where the state will back. And there's a system called courts, by the way, where if there's a dispute, it goes to the court somehow makes a decision, and then the court's decision influences the power of the government in who to support, either by using its monopoly on corporal punishment, which, in the form of the police or their jail system or what have you. Now, you doing NFTs that aren't recognized by the state, that agreement might not be legally enforceable. So it's essentially
That's why
worthless.
you have to separate the metaverse, where it's digital contracts, versus
Right,
where it's physical and digital, where of
right,
course time and space dominates code as law.
right.
Um, that's
Yeah. So
you will have code as law if you're talking about digital real estate, but not if you're talking about physical. The local jurisdiction will always trump the digital jurisdiction.
right. So the
Wait,
use.
yeah, they're two different things. From what I'm hearing here, like an NFT is just a digital asset. So if you say it's a digital, Tyler, you might be. I think what you're saying is a digital. You digify, like, say, your title to something. Just because you've made it an NFT doesn't make it any more valid than the paper one, right? So if it's a piece of physical land, like physical island, the fact that someone NFT'd the title doesn't make it valid in some other way than it
Right.
be in
This
the
is my
real world.
point. Right.
But if it's a digital asset, but if it's a digital, as Nicholas just said, if it's a digital asset, so if you own a digital, plot of land in a specified metaverse, that would also be, I mean, just tracking on that again, but it's like owning a game or something.
Yeah. But
So
but the point I'm trying to get to, which I tortured, was that there are advantages to doing things digitally. Obviously, every geek in the room knows that. And the question is, will the governments adopt them in some cases? Now, I mentioned, the key word in my whole previous rant, I don't wonder if anyone picked up on it, was the word court, because that's a very physical entity that is making decisions about now a non-physical construct. And what I'm proposing is, because these non-physical constructs like NFTs um, enable people to participate from all over the world. You could have a Japanese guy and an Israeli girl buying digital land in Botswana. So what happens? I believe what's going to need to happen potentially is digital courts that the governments of countries will actually allow to be the arbiters, or what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't think that's arbitrators, but
Arbitrator,
but
yes.
that but I think that you have to. I think that there's just conflation of two things. So if you have a digital identity, so an NFT is just a name for a digital identity, and it's a digital identity that is the summary of words that are code, as they say, code as law. Ultimately, if you have a piece of land in time and space in the physical world, the jurisdiction will always be the local jurisdiction, whether it's a nation state, or whether it's LA County, or whether it's you know whoever. It will always be local. It will always be enforced through law, and it will always be enforced through the democracy that elects judges and everything else that they do. So that is the physical world. When you have a token that represents that physical thing, you're really into the securitization of that property, and then you have laws that apply to how those tokens are distributed. And the reason why they're regulated is because you need to understand the laws of the land that govern the shared interest, or the co-investment, when you are owning a share of a piece of land. Those are separate things, and this is where people conflate what NFTs will be used for in the physical world, or identity will be used for in the physical world. The idea that you will digitize your title deeds, I think, is an excellent idea, because you pay 1% insurance for making sure there are no mistakes there, and you could have that verified, and you could cut out costs if you had a whole suite of verified documentation that enabled you to sell your house peer-to-peer using digitized legal documents that are enforceable and cryptographically secure, so that you can avoid paying 6% to agents, insurance, and others, and improve the exchange of physical property using cryptographically secure digital identity information and attestation information. That alone, that 5-6% saving, is worth trillions of dollars to future homeowners, and I think the governments will be wise to do that. But an NFT, per se, for digital land will, if it's decentralized, it will be Coder's law, and if it is centralized, it will again accord with the nature of the offering of that product, and that will be either a security, a commodity, a currency, or a utility.
So the article that Valerie shared is that the UK's High Court has recognized NFTs as property, meaning something you can own, in a case which is likely to have far-reaching implications for disputes involving digital art, among others. The action was brought in March this year by Lavinia Osborne, the founder of Women in Blockchain Talks, who claimed that two digital works from the Boss Beauties collection, an NFT-based initiative designed to create opportunities and raise funds for females, has been stolen from her online wallet. In a judgment due to be published later this week, the judge held that the assets were property and thus able to have access to legal protections. In this instance, the injunction served on accounts on Ozone Networks to freeze the assets, and the bankers' trust disclosure compelling OpenSea to send information about the two account holders who currently hold the NFTs. An additional permission to serve the orders, regardless of jurisdiction, is also significant for cases involving digital art, given the physical location of those involved is often unknown, or rather irrelevant. Quote, "It is of the utmost significance as, for the first time in the world, as far as we are aware, a court of law has recognized that an NFT is property capable of being frozen by way of injunction," said the lawyer with or counsel on the case. This ruling therefore removes any uncertainty that NFTs are property in and of themselves, distinct from the thing they represent. Under the law of England and Wales, OpenSea has since blocked the sale of NFTs on the platform, but did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
You can have, by contract, anything can be recognized as property. At the end of the day, it's what can they do in enforcement terms. If there is
Right.
a centralized company that has sent, that you have engaged with, like Yuga Labs, to buy that land, then Yuga Labs becomes the nexus that you go for. If you were doing something truly decentralized, where it is Coder's law, the interesting things are where you've got hacks, where the contract has been, hacked or exploited completely legally because the developers have made some error. As we saw with Ronin or Wormhole, or those sorts of attacks, where in reality it's fair game. The developers made a mistake, but the question is that enforceable or not? Well, you've got no one to go after. So these issues, I think, are just the evolution of what can the government do, or what can the law do to rescue or freeze that asset. I'd be interested to know how they're freezing that asset.
Yeah. Okay, so now we get into the tweets, like the one Cheryl just pinned to the top of the room, that India seizes $725 million, nearly $1 billion, of Xiaomi assets in local banks in India over illegal remittances back to their subsidiaries, no doubt, as they refer to them, which probably means the mothership back in China. India said on Saturday it had seized the millions from the local bank accounts of China's Xiaomi after a probe found the smartphone maker had made illegal remittances to foreign entities by passing them off as royalty payments. The Enforcement Directorate had been investigating the Chinese company's business practices over suspected violations of Indian foreign exchange laws. The Financial Crime Fighting Agency said on Saturday it had seized the bank accounts assets of Xiaomi after finding the firm had remitted the foreign currency equivalent of about 55 billion rupees to 3 foreign-based entities, including one Xiaomi Group entity, in the guise of royalty payments. Such huge amounts in the name of royalties were remitted on the instructions of their Chinese parent group entities. I'm shocked. Absolutely shocked. Xiaomi said in a statement issued later on Saturday that it complies with Indian laws and believes its royalty payments and statements to the bank are all legit and truthful. These
So they didn't place enough donations to the tax minister with things. That's how typical corporations do a thing. I guess there's too much political heat or something.
I mean, ultimately, this is interesting on two levels. One, that China operates currency controls, as does India, and obviously the Xiaomi approach was to do what the Western companies like Google and Amazon and Apple were doing through Ireland and what was called the Double Dutch Treaty, whereby you use royalty payments, so as ways of moving money and sheltering it so that it doesn't get included as just remitting funds back to the home base. And so it really is about royalties and how royalties are treated and how they are accepted from currency controls. So I think you would see the law change in India to prevent that royalty monies being leaking out of their centralized currency system.
Okay. Next up is a tweet from Sharon. U.S. and India. Speaking of India, U.S. and India launched talks about military AI. It's clear India has got an interest in bringing AI into national security, says a retired Air Force Lieutenant General and former director of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or whatnot. So, yeah, that's interesting.
So these talks really began last year, but they picked up steam again this year, where we're now partnering with India for a lot of our military AI projects. But one of the interesting parts that in the article to me was when the Department of Defense was asked, and they said, well, India understands what threat China is to them currently. So I thought, therein lies the reason why we're bringing this conversation up and looping it back in at this quarter, which is typically not the time for expenses for our budget.
Okay, Northrop and AT&T partner to build 5G digital battle network. Quote, when we think about today's environment, it's less about the traditional arms race of the past and it's more about the technology race of today.
I think you should also think about both that headline and the previous headline in the light of how long does the Eastern, let's call it Shanghai Cooperation Organization, hold together if India is freezing Chinese companies' money and they are offering themselves as an alternative for production purposes to the American corporate elite, and how does that embrace look to that's what's known as soft diplomacy in the American parlance. So it's interesting to see that the Indians are effectively declaring some form of economic warfare on the Chinese and on a very high profile member of that team. So I think it's interesting that they would do that. They must believe that there's a reason for it.
Right. Now we're leading back to the hyper dependence on India and how that maps things a bit differently in terms of now you taken that one element and made it an extreme catalyst for both Russia and China in two regards, right? Either they look at this as the immediate threat and they bind together, that then changes the geopolitical flow, or this becomes a tenuous area for them and furthers the divide, which then benefits them.
So ultimately, it is a sale to the highest bidder, which says, either you provide us with business or the West will provide us with business. And it's a form of corporate bribery.
Heard it on Tech News first. I'm just saying.
So the next is from Jeff G via CNN. Inside the space hotel scheduled to open in 2025, Orbital Assembly Corporation is planning to build Voyager Station and Pioneer Station, two space hubs in the sky.
Bouncy houses in space.
I couldn't think of anything worse than being stuck up in space and nervous about getting back.
Well, you can always like just fall back down. There's actually some crazy things where if you ever want to see something insane, look up something called the Moose reentry vehicle. It stands for something like man out of orbit reentry. It's basically literally a wearable reentry vehicle that would inflate, and you would literally ride a giant bouncy house inflatable through the reentry heat shield. It was a legitimate technology. They actually researched it, and then they said, "Can we get budget to build it?" And they're like, "Let's just make the thing not crash. That seems like a better thing." But they actually, it's still could supposedly be made. So Tyler, in the future, there will be some very strange backpacks in these things because it's so cheap to do.
It
It's gonna be
reminds me
fun.
of Demolition
I want to
Man
know who'll pilot
when
first.
the cars used to crash in Demolition Man.
Yes, same idea, except they designed one for re-entry. It's one of the most insane things I've ever read in a space program. Like just reading about projects with stuff. I'll send a link in the description in the chats with stuff. It's absolutely insane. I can also DM anyone who wants to look at this stuff. It's nuts.
Yeah, I definitely want to see that reentry. Survival rate?
Can you get pretty hot?
Well, the primary issue with things like that is not that, because we've already proven that we can make resins that don't break under impact, but the problem is everything inside will still ultimately turn into mush. So
Well, so
got to
the
figure
the
out
way that
how
this
to
worked was
absorb.
ablative. It was ablative. The idea is to essentially create a plasma barrier on the front, and the front layer
Mm.
of basically polymer just instantly evaporates and it becomes a super hot plasma, which incidentally actually provides some shielding to the layers behind it. But you're continuously losing mass as you're falling through the atmosphere and using it as basically a decelerant, as a brake. So
What does it
that's
do
where.
to the human body, though?
Oh well, the human body can take a surprising amount of G forces as long as you have as long as you're very careful on which direction and how people are braced and other things like that. It's actually somewhat surprising how much you can survive. John Stapp with some really good studies on that one.
You better hope it doesn't turn in the air, otherwise you're going to be a washing
Oh
machine.
no, you're screwed. You're screwed if that happens.
Okay. Next up is from BB from the BBC. You did it again, BB.
Sorry.
About Ukraine, a wake up call for India. Indonesia, the world's biggest producer of palm oil. Oh boy, is it the biggest producer of palm oil. Holy cow, is there a lot to know about Indian palm oil? Announced last week that it would halt exports to stabilize spiking prices at home. I can confirm this because palm oil is widely used in Thailand, and Thailand is short on palm oil in the supermarket shelves. So,
David, isn't there something about palm oil being extremely polluting?
yeah, well, the harvesting of it is rather.
It's like strip
And then
mining
they
for
need to,
ecology.
yeah, like sometimes you need to burn down those forests for those palm trees.
Yeah.
If you ever see some like drone footage of some palm oil plantations, it looks really eerie, like something that looks like from a video game engine or something. It's because they're all like perfectly planted in these like patterns as far as the eye can see. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
And why
Why we
So
need
say
robotics in the metaverse to harvest palms digitally from somewhere else.
the point of the article is though that India should start panicking because India's addiction to imported cooking oils gets a jolt because of the war in Ukraine, because the war in Ukraine is causing Indonesia to hoard their palm oil. There you go. The next is also from Jeff G. that Russians, speaking of farming and the Ukraine, Russians spend $5 million on farm vehicles from Ukraine to find out they've been remotely disabled. Russian troops in the occupied city of Melitopol have stolen all of the equipment from the farm equipment dealership and then shipped it to Chechnya and then found out it doesn't work because it was remotely locked.
Incidentally, this intersects with the right to repair legislation, as essentially one of their things that got that through Congress was specifically because they were saying farm equipment
doesn't have the ability for you to change out the electronics, and that's something that they were trying to fight specifically against. John Deere is going to use this as an example for lobbying to Congress and saying why they should be allowed to keep their monopoly on the electronics for farm tractors. Going to say, look, foreign policy wise, you can do all sorts of cool stuff like this, and they're probably going to have
Oh,
some.
that's horrible.
It's the same system being affected here. It's just being used for foreign policy as opposed to domestic.
So Poppy found one from Chile that truck automation gets going at one of Chile's largest copper mines, now has autonomous massive trucks operating the mine. And
All of this begs the question: is who's controlling this, and who can turn these things off? As we've said before about the consumer level, if Tesla or any other car manufacturer can stop you being able to start your car if you don't make your payments, for example, and prevent you going to work, these are very real issues.
Right. The mining one in Chile's, I know you're probably referring to the John Deere one, which is much closer, but the mining one's kind of interesting. Those autonomous vehicles, often for underground mining, have to go through like a spiral pattern that's literally you have to drive for like 40 minutes just to get to below ground, load up with them things, go exactly 40 minutes in the exact opposite direction. Highly repetitive, repeating, lots of money on the line, high uptime. These are ideal, high labor costs. These are ideal scenarios for automation. Even the above ground strip mining have similar operations where often the company will own the entire territory that you're doing the transportation with from ore to the whatever processing facility is. One of the biggest problems for automation has nothing to do with anything about technological challenges. It has to do with essentially whether or not you own the land going back and forth and whether or not you can control the roadways and integration with existing assets. If you don't have to worry about all that, you have 100% control of the area. Automation was ready like decades ago. But the key part is no one was willing to put the investment into it to make it deployed at scale. Mining companies have different sets of incentives, and you're going to see those sorts of systems that are developed for these provide the R&D that's going to be required to backport this into consumer highways and stuff like that for more civilian transport later on.
okay, the next is from Wired via Jeff G. Could carbon dioxide be turned into jet fuel? A team at Oxford has reverse engineered fuel from the greenhouse gas, but so far just in the lab. And last but not least, researchers keep finding creepy dolls washing up on Texas beaches.
This sounds like the intro to
How
a Hollywood
appropriate.
movie.
Sounds like that new British movie where they had that body on the shores of Greece.
No, we just solved the problem. We know where Chucky is.
Just need some Twilight Zone music or something.
You know what's wild, Tyler?
Yeah.
I've had while I've been gone working on that film, I had quite a bit of downtime to catch up on a couple of shows. I watched The Foundation and a couple other ones. Science fiction, particularly Isaac Asimov and a couple others, really do predict the future, like with an eerie accuracy. Like everything we talk about in our rooms, I swear to God, have been discussed in old science fiction books, both the good and the bad, like even the issues. It's just wild to me how much science fiction actually does predict our future.
Well, for example, in our physics department, there used to be like every Tuesday, an author or science fiction writer would come by and give a talk, and then they would speak to the professors as well. So I think there's been a tradition, at least for a few decades, of science fiction writers having conversations or discussions with academics, and I think that's part of the reason why that tight integration makes it that much more likely that the technology could be developed because it somehow is linked to some existing developments or research.
Jules Verne spent his time at the
Mm.
patent office equivalent in France and basically spent his time literally just voraciously devouring any kind of book that he could get his hand on, talking to any man of learning during his day. A lot of those ideas that he developed were original and unique, but a lot of them were combinations of existing concepts that were very well developed. It's just not a lot of people knew about them. He had the benefit of being able to popularize some of these combinations in ways that people hadn't seen before. And that inspired whole generations of people to create everything from rocket ships to submarines. The really cool part about that, though, is that tradition of science fiction driving people to create the science for real and the people that create it for real, and inspiring new generations of art and science. This is a very long running tradition. It's been very, very fruitful collaboration for both.
It's very cool.
So, Michael, is it pure coincidence that I mentioned you earlier in the program today?
You know
Yeah.
it's not. Come on.
Come on now. Somebody pinged Michael in.
We are literally universally linked.
Yeah.
It's like the universe hears you say my name and
Yep.
it immediately hits my soul and says, "You are being summoned by your
Yep.
bestie.
Yeah.
Get in there."
He does this
Well,
all the time.
I
Let him
like
say
that.
Cal and watch Cal just appear.
Oh yeah,
okay.
mental
So
chatter.
if somebody want to take credit for pinging Michael in, baby, you're laughing a little too
No,
much.
no, 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 no. This time I didn't ping him, so I just
Yeah,
want
no,
to go.
seriously,
Yeah.
nobody pinged me in. I was honestly on my way over to the lake.
You know what's weird about this is we've all experienced this idea that you think of somebody and then they call, but we as a live audience actually just watched it happen.
Okay, it's
It happens more than a few times here though. Almost any time
And
you
yeah,
talk about Apple,
yeah.
I get tingly.
I hate to be the
I
boring.
do
I
like the
hate to be the
opposite,
bo-
but for crypto.
I hate to be the boring one, but we mention Michael nearly every day, so that's a compliment to Michael.
So get out of
The
here! I
fact,
mention Michael every day.
it's
several
true.
times a
It's
week.
true.
Speaking of,
It's
More
called
than
by the
twice
way,
a day.
attribution error. Attribution error.
though, randomly, I'm coming to Thailand in August if you're gonna be around at
Yeah.
that time.
Oh hell yeah! Let me know. That'd be
I will
awesome.
for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, you got to send me DM and then we'll set it up. Okay. Well, thank you to everybody. It's past my bedtime, so we got to wrap it up. Somebody was jumping on the mic.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tyler, if you're talking about itching in your ear, you mentioned your NFT as the subject matter of your next thing. I met someone who's in the process of like signing Joe Rogan and Snoop Dogg to a platform for live broadcasting in the metaverse. So, can I DM you and
Please
we'll
do.
talk about that?
Please do.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. We will catch you next time. Good to see you, Michael.
Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
same bad time, same bad